A runaway Omega pretended to be the Alpha King's partner for one night, but his wolf had already chosen her. Elena's heart slammed against her ribs as the guard's torch swung closer to the hedge where she hid. She pressed her back against the cold stone wall of the palace garden, holding her breath, praying the darkness would hide her stolen gown and her bare, bleeding feet. Behind her, somewhere past the tall iron gates, she could still hear the shouts of the men Roderick Vane had sent to drag her back to him. She had run for 3 days without stopping. Tonight, she could not run anymore. The torchlight passed. The guard moved on, boots crunching over gravel, his voice calling out to another somewhere near the fountain. Elena let out a shaking breath and closed her eyes for 1 second, just one, to steady herself. When she opened them again, she saw the golden light spilling from the palace's grand hall, and she heard music, laughter, the clinking of glasses. A celebration. People dressed like stars, dancing like they had never known fear in their lives. She did not know yet that stepping into that light would change everything. Elena had been born in Omega in a world that did not treat Omegas kindly. She had grown up in a small pack on the eastern hills where her mother taught her to sew and her father taught her to stay quiet, to stay small, to never draw attention to herself. Omegas were gentle by nature, prized for their calm presence, but that gentleness made them targets too. When she turned 19, her father arranged her mating to Roderick Vane, a wealthy alpha lord from the Southern Territory. Elena had never met him before the day of the ceremony. She only knew, the moment his cold eyes found hers across the room, that she would rather die than belong to him. She had been right to be afraid. In the 2 months since the binding ceremony, Roderick had shown her exactly what kind of man he was. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His control came from something quieter and colder, a constant reminder that she was his property now, his to command, his to punish if she displeased him. Elena had endured it as long as she could. Then, one night, when his guards were distracted by a hunting trip, she had slipped out through the servants' passage and run into the forest with nothing but the clothes on her back. Now here she was, 3 days later, standing at the edge of the capital city, exhausted, starving, and completely without a plan. She looked down at herself. Her dress was torn at the hem, stained with mud and blood from where thorns had caught her skin. She could not walk into that grand hall looking like this. But she also could not stay outside, where Roderick's men were searching every street and alley for her. She needed to disappear, even if only for one night. A door near the garden wall stood slightly open, unattended. Elena slipped through it and found herself in a narrow servants' corridor, lined with shelves of folded linens and, near the end, a rack of gowns clearly meant for guests who had arrived without proper attire, a courtesy offered by the palace staff. She grabbed the first one that looked close to her size, a deep blue gown with silver embroidery along the sleeves, and changed quickly behind a stack of crates, her hands trembling with both cold and fear. When she stepped out again, she looked, for the first time in days, like she belonged somewhere. She had no idea that the palace she had stumbled into belonged to the Alpha King himself, and that tonight was not an ordinary celebration. It was the King's Ascension Ball, the night every pack law required him to present his chosen partner to the court, or lose the right to his throne. Elena walked into the grand hall with her head down, trying to look like she knew where she was going. The room was enormous, filled with more people than she had ever seen in one place. Chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls of light. Nobles in fine clothing moved in clusters, exchanging words she could not hear over the music. She kept close to the edges of the room, weaving between servers carrying trays of food she had not eaten anything like in days, her stomach aching with hunger she refused to acknowledge. Then she heard the voice. "You there, stop." Elena froze. A palace guard, tall and stern-faced, was walking toward her with 2 others flanking him. Her mind raced. Had Roderick's men already reached the palace? Had someone recognized her stolen gown? She wanted to run, but running would only confirm she had something to hide. "I don't believe I've seen you at court before," the guard said, studying her with sharp, suspicious eyes. "Every guest at tonight's ball was required to register at the gate. Who are you, and who accompanies you?" Elena's mouth went dry. Around her, a few nearby nobles had turned to watch, sensing the beginning of some small drama to entertain themselves with. She needed an answer, and she needed it now, or she would be dragged out of this hall and straight into the hands of whoever came looking for her next. Her eyes darted across the room in desperation and landed, for reasons she could never later explain, on the raised platform at the far end of the hall, where a man sat upon a throne carved from pale stone, dressed in black and silver, watching the crowd below with an expression of restless boredom. Even from this distance she could feel the weight of his presence, the kind of quiet authority that made an entire room orbit around him without him needing to say a word. She did not know his name. She only knew, from the way every guard straightened when they glanced toward him, that he must be someone of enormous importance. "I am here with the king," Elena said before she could stop herself. The words left her mouth like a stone dropped into still water, and the ripples spread instantly. The guard's eyebrows rose. The nobles nearby went silent. Someone gasped. Elena realized, with growing horror, exactly what she had just claimed, and exactly who that man on the throne must be. "You are here with His Majesty," the guard repeated slowly, disbelief thick in his voice. "The king has stated all evening that he arrives with no partner, yet you claim otherwise." Elena's heart pounded so hard she feared everyone in the room could hear it. She had made a terrible mistake. There was no way to take the words back now, not with dozens of eyes fixed on her, waiting to see if she would be exposed as a liar and dragged away for insulting the crown. "Perhaps," said a new voice, calm and low, cutting through the tension like a blade through silk. "She simply arrived before I had the chance to introduce her myself." The crowd parted, as the king rose from his throne and descended the steps toward them. Elena's breath caught. Up close he was even more striking than she had guessed from across the room, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and eyes the color of storm clouds before rain. He moved with the unhurried confidence of a man who had never once doubted his place in any room he entered. He stopped beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, and extended his hand as though this were the most natural thing in the world. "Forgive my delay," he said smoothly, addressing the guard while his eyes remained fixed on Elena. "I was occupied elsewhere. This is Elena." He said her name as though he had always known it, though she had never spoken it to him. Elena stared up at him, stunned, waiting for him to turn her over to the guards, to expose her lie in front of the entire court. Instead, he simply waited, his hand still extended, giving her the smallest, almost invisible nod. With no other choice, Elena placed her hand in his. The moment their skin touched, something strange happened. She felt it, a pulse of warmth that traveled up her arm and settled somewhere deep in her chest, unfamiliar and impossible to explain. She glanced up at him and saw, just for an instant, something shift behind his stormy eyes, a flicker of surprise quickly hidden behind practiced composure. "Your Majesty," the guard said, bowing quickly, clearly eager to remove himself from whatever tension had just passed between them. "My apologies for the confusion." "No harm done," the king replied smoothly, though his gaze had not left Elena's face. As the guard retreated and the crowd slowly returned to their conversations, Elena realized she was still holding his hand, and he had made no move to let go. Around them, whispers had already begun to spread, the entire hall buzzing with the sudden appearance of a partner no one had seen before, arriving with mud still faintly visible on the hem of her borrowed gown. Elena did not know it yet, but she had just stepped into something far larger than a single night's escape. She had just placed herself directly at the center of a kingdom's most important tradition, standing beside a man whose wolf, in that single moment of contact, had already begun to stir with a recognition neither of them could yet explain. For now, she only knew one thing clearly. She could not let go of his hand, not without drawing more attention than she could survive tonight, so she stayed there, frozen beside a stranger who had just saved her from disaster, wondering who he truly was and why, despite everything, some small part of her did not feel afraid standing next to him. The king leaned down slightly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You have exactly until dawn to explain to me who you really are," he said quietly. "But for tonight, it seems we are partners. Try to look like you are enjoying yourself." Elena swallowed hard and forced the smallest smile onto her face, her mind spinning with fear, exhaustion, and a confusion she could not name. Whatever this night became, she understood one thing with absolute certainty. There was no turning back now. The music began again. The king guided her gently toward the center of the hall, and as the crowd watched with open curiosity, Elena took her first step into a lie that would change the course of her entire life. Draven Ashran had not slept properly in 11 days. As the newly crowned Alpha King of the Ashran territory, he carried a burden his father never fully prepared him for. Ancient pack law demanded that within one full moon cycle of his ascension, he present a chosen partner before the assembled court, proof that the crown would continue to a stable bloodline. Without a partner, rival alpha houses could challenge his right to rule, and there were more than a few lords in that hall tonight who would gladly see him fail. He had no partner. He had refused every arranged match his advisors proposed, unwilling to bind himself to someone chosen for political convenience rather than genuine connection. He had always believed, perhaps foolishly, that a king's wolf would recognize its true mate when the moment came, the way old stories described. But 11 days ago, with the ascension deadline approaching and no candidate in sight, that belief had started to feel like a luxury he could no longer afford. Tonight was the deadline. Midnight, precisely. According to the law scrolls his advisor Edmund Hale had read aloud to him at least a dozen times that week, each reading laced with growing panic. "Your Majesty," Edmund had said just an hour earlier, pacing behind the throne with his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had gone pale. "Lord Vane and Lord Castellan have both arrived early. They are watching the doors like wolves circling a wounded deer. If midnight comes and you stand before this court without a partner, they will move against you before the sun rises." "I am aware of the law, Edmund," Draven had answered, his voice flat with exhaustion. "Repeating it will not create a partner from nothing." "Then perhaps we consider one of the candidates from the northern houses," Edmund pressed. "Lady Miriam has expressed continued interest, and her family holds considerable influence that could strengthen your position significantly." Draven had said nothing. He simply stared out over the crowded hall below, watching nobles laugh and dance while his entire future balanced on a decision he refused to make out of desperation. He would rather lose his crown than bind himself to someone his wolf felt nothing for. But as the hour grew later, that resolve had started to feel less like principle and more like reckless pride. Then, near the eastern entrance, he had noticed a young woman he did not recognize, standing perfectly still, while a palace guard questioned her with obvious suspicion. There was something about her, even from that distance, that pulled his attention away from every other conversation happening around him. Her posture was tense, frightened, though she tried to hide it. Her gown, while fine, did not quite fit her the way clothing fits someone who had grown up wearing such things. And beneath the confusion in her eyes, there was something sharper, a fierce determination that reminded him, oddly, of a cornered animal, deciding whether to fight or flee. He had not expected her to say his name. When the words left her mouth, claiming to be his partner, Draven had felt something entirely unfamiliar rise up inside him, a sudden sharp pull from deep within his chest, that he recognized immediately as his wolf reacting, not with suspicion, but with something closer to relief. It made no sense. He had never met this woman before in his life, yet some ancient instinctive part of him had responded to her claim as though it were simply true, as though his wolf had been waiting all this time for exactly this moment. He had risen from his throne almost without deciding to, drawn toward her before his mind had fully caught up with what his body was doing. Now, standing beside her at the edge of the dance floor with her small hand still resting in his, Draven felt that same pull intensify, a warmth spreading through his chest that he could not explain through logic alone. Her scent, faint beneath the borrowed perfume of the gown she wore, held something underneath it that struck him as achingly familiar, though he knew with absolute certainty they had never met before tonight. His wolf, usually a quiet and steady presence within him, was suddenly restless, pressing forward against his control with an urgency Draven had never felt before. It wanted him closer to her. It wanted to protect her from whatever fear still lingered behind her eyes. It wanted, more than anything, to claim her as his own, immediately and completely. Draven forced the impulse down, confused by its intensity. He did not know this woman. Whatever his wolf believed, he needed answers before he allowed himself to trust something this sudden and overwhelming. "You seem tense," he said quietly as he led her into the slow rhythm of the dance, keeping his voice low enough that no one nearby could overhear. "Considering you claim to be my partner in front of half the court, I would expect a bit more confidence." Elena's eyes flicked up to meet his, startled, before she composed herself. "Forgive me, Your Majesty. I did not mean to cause trouble. I only needed a moment to avoid being questioned further." "Questioned about what, exactly?" Draven asked, studying her carefully. "You arrived at my ball uninvited, in a gown that clearly does not belong to you, looking as though you have not eaten in days. That tells me you are running from something. I would like to know what." Elena's expression tightened, fear flashing briefly across her face before she managed to smooth it away. "It is not something I wish to discuss, Your Majesty. I only need until morning. After that, I will leave, and you will never see me again." Draven felt something in his chest tighten uncomfortably at those words, an instinctive resistance to the idea of her leaving that startled him with its intensity. He said nothing about it, though, choosing instead to study her expression as they continued moving through the dance. "You misunderstand me," he said finally. "I am not asking so that I might expose you. I am asking because whatever frightened you enough to run through a forest in torn shoes is clearly still a danger to you, and I find myself unwilling to simply hand you back to it." Elena looked at him with something between confusion and disbelief, as though she had not expected kindness from a stranger, especially not one as powerful as he was. Why would a king concern himself with the troubles of someone he only just met? Draven did not have an easy answer for that. He could not explain, not even to himself yet, the strange certainty settling into his bones, that this woman mattered to him in a way he had never experienced before. Instead, he simply said, "Perhaps I am curious. And perhaps, for tonight at least, it benefits us both to maintain the story you started. You needed protection. I needed a partner to present before midnight. It seems we have accidentally solved each other's problems." Elena's brow furrowed. "You intend to actually present me, as your partner, to the entire court. I intend to survive the night without losing my crown to men who would rule this territory far more cruelly than I ever would," Draven said simply. "If that requires presenting you as my partner for a single evening, then yes, that is exactly what I intend to do." Around them, the music shifted into a slower, more formal piece, and Draven noticed several pairs of eyes watching them with obvious interest, nobles whispering behind painted fans, calculating what this sudden, unexpected partner might mean for the political balance of the court. Among them, near the far wall, he spotted Edmund watching with an expression caught somewhere between panic and cautious hope. "This does not have to become anything beyond tonight," Draven added, noticing the tension still visible in Elena's shoulders. "Once midnight passes and the requirement is satisfied, you are free to leave, and no one will trouble you further about it. I only ask that you allow me to help you disappear safely, wherever you need to go." Elena studied him for a long moment, clearly searching his expression for any sign of deception. Whatever she found there seemed to ease some of her guardedness, though not all of it. "One night," she said finally. "And then I go, no questions asked." "One night," Draven agreed, though something deep within him, some instinct he could not silence, already doubted whether one night would truly be enough. As they continued through the dance, his wolf remained restless beneath his skin, humming with a quiet, insistent certainty that had nothing to do with politics, or crowns, or ancient laws. It had everything to do with the woman standing in front of him, whose fingers trembled slightly in his grip, whose eyes carried both fear and a fierce refusal to be broken by it. Draven did not yet understand what his wolf had already recognized, but as midnight crept closer and the court watched their every move, he found himself unwilling to let go of her hand, even as the music slowed to its final, lingering notes. The dance ended, but the tension between them did not. Elena felt every eye in the hall following her as Draven led her away from the dance floor, his hand resting lightly against the small of her back in a gesture that felt both protective and unfamiliar. She had spent the last 3 days convinced that every stranger's glance meant danger, that every raised voice meant Roderick's men had found her. Standing beside the king, surrounded by nobles who watched her with open curiosity, she felt that same fear pressing against her chest, though for entirely different reasons now. "You are allowed to breathe," Draven murmured as they walked toward a quieter corner of the hall, near tall glass doors that opened onto a moonlit balcony. "You look as though you expect the floor to open beneath you." "Forgive me if pretending to be royalty does not come naturally," Elena replied, a flicker of dry humor slipping through despite her exhaustion. "I was raised sewing hems, not attending balls." A faint smile crossed Draven's face, quick and unexpected, softening the sharp lines of his expression. "Then you are doing remarkably well for someone with no practice." They stepped out onto the balcony together, leaving the noise of the hall muffled behind glass doors. The night air was cool against Elena's skin, carrying the scent of blooming jasmine from the gardens below. For the first time since she had fled her home, she felt herself exhale fully, the tight knot of fear in her chest loosening just slightly. "You still have not told me why you were running," Draven said, leaning against the stone railing, his gaze fixed on her rather than the moonlit gardens spread out beneath them. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how exposed she felt beneath his steady attention. "It does not concern you, Your Majesty." "Perhaps not," Draven agreed easily, "but you arrived here with torn shoes and fresh scratches along your arms, clearly having traveled a great distance without proper protection. Whoever you were running from clearly did not treat you well. I find it difficult to simply ignore that." Elena's jaw tightened. She was not used to anyone noticing her, let alone caring about what had happened to her. Growing up, she had learned that speaking up about mistreatment only invited more of it. Roderick had made that lesson painfully clear during their short, miserable time together. "I was mated to a man I did not choose," she said finally, the words coming out sharper than she intended. "He was cruel in ways that had nothing to do with raised fists, but were just as damaging. I left before he could do something I could never recover from." Draven's expression darkened, though his voice remained steady when he spoke again. And this man, he is searching for you tonight. He will not stop searching, Elena admitted quietly. Not until he finds me, or I am too far away for him to reach. Something shifted in Draven's posture, subtle but unmistakable, a tightening of his shoulders that reminded Elena of a predator sensing a threat nearby. You are safe within these walls tonight, he said firmly. No one enters my palace uninvited, especially not a man seeking to reclaim someone who clearly does not wish to be found. Elena studied him carefully, searching for any hint of the calculated diplomacy she expected from someone in his position. Instead, she found only quiet, unwavering conviction, as though protecting her had become, somehow, a personal matter rather than a political inconvenience. Why does this concern you so deeply? She asked, echoing the question from earlier, though this time with genuine curiosity rather than suspicion. You do not know me. I am nothing more than a stranger who stumbled into your ball tonight. Draven was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting toward the gardens below before returning to her face. I am not entirely certain myself, he admitted finally, but something about your presence tonight feels significant in a way I cannot fully explain. Perhaps it is simply exhaustion clouding my judgment, or perhaps there is something else at work that neither of us fully understands yet. Elena felt a strange warmth spread through her chest at his words, an unfamiliar sensation she quickly attributed to relief rather than anything deeper. She had spent so long fearing every alpha she encountered, that she had forgotten what it felt like to stand beside one without dread coiling in her stomach. Their quiet moment was interrupted by the sound of the balcony doors opening behind them. Edmund Hale stepped through, his expression tight with barely restrained urgency. Your Majesty, he said, bowing quickly before glancing between Draven and Elena with poorly concealed curiosity. Midnight approaches. The court expects your formal presentation within the hour. Draven's jaw tightened slightly, though he nodded in acknowledgement. We will return shortly, Edmund. As the advisor retreated back into the hall, Elena felt her earlier anxiety return in full force. Formal presentation, she repeated slowly. What exactly does that involve? A brief ceremony before the assembled court, Draven explained, his voice carefully measured. You will stand beside me while I confirm your identity as my chosen partner. It requires nothing beyond your presence and a few simple words. And if someone recognizes that I am lying, Elena asked, panic creeping into her voice despite her efforts to remain composed. If Roderick's men are among the guests tonight, or if someone questions my background too closely. Draven stepped closer, his expression softening slightly as he studied the fear evident in her eyes. No one will question you tonight, Elena. I will ensure that personally. All you need to do is stand beside me and allow the court to see what they expect to see, nothing more. Elena wanted to believe him, wanted to trust the quiet confidence in his voice, but years of learning to protect herself made trust difficult to offer freely, even to someone who had shown her nothing but kindness so far. And after tonight, she said quietly, you said I would be free to leave, with your help ensuring my safety. Do you intend to keep that promise? I do not make promises I intend to break, Draven said, his voice carrying quiet conviction that left no room for doubt. Whatever happens tonight, your safety and your freedom remain yours to choose. I will not force you into a life you do not want, regardless of what my wolf may want. The mention of his wolf caught Elena's attention, though she did not fully understand what he meant by it. Before she could ask, the sound of distant chimes echoed from somewhere within the palace, marking the approach of midnight. We should return, Draven said, extending his hand toward her once more. The court awaits. Elena hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his again, feeling that same strange warmth travel up her arm at the contact. Whatever uncertainty lingered in her mind, she found herself trusting this stranger more than she had trusted anyone in longer than she could remember. Together they walked back through the glass doors, back into the golden light and watchful eyes of the court, toward a ceremony that would bind Elena's fate to the Alpha Kings in ways neither of them yet understood. As they crossed the hall, Elena noticed several nobles watching them with expressions ranging from curiosity to open suspicion. Near the far end of the room, standing apart from the crowd, a tall man in dark travel clothes watched their approach with narrowed, calculating eyes. Elena's stomach tightened with unease, though she could not place why this particular stranger unsettled her more than the others. She had no way of knowing yet that his presence tonight would soon become the greatest threat she had faced since fleeing her home. Draven guided her toward the raised platform at the center of the hall, where the throne stood waiting beneath banners bearing the Ashran crest. As they climbed the steps together, Elena felt the weight of hundreds of eyes settling upon her, and beside her, she felt Draven's hand tighten slightly around hers, a silent reassurance that she was not facing this moment alone. The court fell silent as the king raised his free hand, calling for attention. Whatever happened next would determine not only his future as ruler of this territory, but Elena's future as well, tangled now, irreversibly, with a man she had known for less than a single evening. Silence spread through the hall like water settling after a stone breaks its surface. Draven stood at the center of the platform, Elena's hand still held firmly in his own, and looked out over the assembled court. Hundreds of faces stared back at him, lords and ladies from every noble house in the territory, all waiting to witness whether their king would satisfy the ancient law, or hand his enemies the opening they had been waiting for. Among the crowd, Draven spotted Lord Castellan standing near the front, his expression carefully neutral, though his eyes held a calculating sharpness that betrayed his true intentions. Beside him stood two other lords from rival houses, watching with equally guarded interest. These were the men who would move against him the moment they sensed weakness. "Tonight marks the completion of my ascension to this throne," Draven announced, his voice carrying easily across the silent hall. "As is required by the laws passed down through generations of my family, I present before you the partner I have chosen to stand beside me as I lead this territory forward." He turned slightly toward Elena, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. He saw the fear still lingering beneath her composed expression, the same fear he had noticed the moment she stumbled into his ball. Something in his chest tightened at the sight of it, an instinct he did not fully understand urging him to erase that fear entirely, to promise her safety not just for tonight, but for as long as she needed it. "This is Elena," he continued, turning back to face the court. "She stands beside me now, and will continue to do so as we move forward together." A murmur rippled through the crowd, a mixture of surprise and curiosity at the sudden appearance of a partner no one had heard of before tonight. Draven kept his expression steady, refusing to allow any hint of uncertainty to show through, even as he felt Elena's fingers tremble slightly within his grip. Near the back of the hall, Draven noticed the same tall stranger in dark travel clothes that Elena had glanced at nervously earlier. The man's eyes were fixed intently on Elena, studying her with an intensity that struck Draven as deeply unsettling. He filed the observation away for later, unwilling to let anything disrupt the ceremony currently unfolding before the court. "According to the laws of our ancestors," Edmund Hale announced, stepping forward with a scroll unrolled in his hands, "the bond between Alpha King and chosen partner must be confirmed through the traditional exchange of words before witnesses. Your Majesty, if you are prepared to proceed." Draven turned fully toward Elena now, taking her other hand in his, so that he held both of hers between his own. He could feel her pulse racing beneath his fingers, could see the barely concealed panic flickering behind her eyes, as the reality of what she had agreed to settled fully upon her. "I choose you," Draven said, the traditional words feeling far heavier on his tongue than he expected, "to stand beside me, to share in the burdens and triumphs of leading this territory, and to remain within my protection for as long as you choose to remain." The final phrase was not part of the traditional vow. Draven added it deliberately, wanting Elena to understand, even within the formal structure of this ceremony, that her choice mattered to him, that whatever bound them together tonight would not become a cage she could never escape. Elena stared up at him, clearly caught off guard by the addition, though something in her expression softened slightly at the words. The court, unaware of the deviation from tradition, waited expectantly for her response. "I accept," Elena said quietly, though her voice carried enough strength to reach across the silent hall. A collective exhale seemed to pass through the assembled nobles, some relieved, others clearly disappointed that their opportunity to challenge the crown had just slipped away. Lord Castellan's expression remained carefully neutral, though Draven noticed the slight tightening of his jaw, a small crack in his composed mask. As the formal ceremony concluded and the musicians resumed their playing, signaling the return to celebration, Draven felt something shift within his chest, a warmth spreading through him that had nothing to do with relief over his secured throne. His wolf, still restless beneath his skin, seemed to settle slightly now that the bond had been formally spoken aloud. Even if both of them understood the true nature of their arrangement remained far more complicated than the court realized. "That is done then," Elena said quietly as they stepped down from the platform, her voice carrying a mixture of relief and lingering unease. "Your crown is secured." "For tonight, yes," Draven agreed, guiding her gently through the crowd of nobles now eager to offer their congratulations and curious questions. "Though I suspect the true test of tonight has only just begun." As if summoned by his words, the tall stranger in dark travel clothes stepped directly into their path, blocking their progress through the crowd with deliberate purpose. Up close, Draven could see the man's features more clearly, sharp and calculating, with eyes that studied Elena with an intensity that made his wolf growl low and warning beneath his skin. "Forgive my intrusion, Your Majesty," the stranger said, his voice smooth and carefully polite, though something cold lingered beneath the surface. "I could not help but notice your newly presented partner. She bears a striking resemblance to someone I have been searching for these past several days." Elena's hand tightened around Draven's, her entire body going rigid beside him. Draven felt her fear as clearly as if it were his own, and something fierce and protective rose up within him in response, his wolf pressing hard against his control, demanding he remove this threat immediately. "I am not aware of any resemblance worth discussing," Draven said, his voice carrying a cold edge that made several nearby nobles pause their conversations to watch the exchange unfold. "Elena has stood beside me tonight as my chosen partner. I would advise against implying otherwise in my own court." The stranger's smile did not waver, though something calculating flickered behind his eyes. "Of course, Your Majesty. I meant no disrespect. Simply an observation, given the unusual circumstances of her sudden appearance tonight." "Who are you?" Draven asked directly, his patience thinning rapidly as Elena's grip on his hand grew tighter still. "Roderick Vane," the stranger replied, offering a shallow bow that felt more mocking than respectful. "Lord of the Southern Territory. I arrived tonight searching for someone quite important to me, who unfortunately fled our home rather abruptly several days ago." Elena's breath caught audibly beside Draven, confirming everything he needed to know about who this man truly was to her. His wolf surged forward with sudden, overwhelming fury, recognizing immediately the threat this man posed to the woman standing beside him, the woman his instincts had already claimed as something far more significant than a temporary solution to a political problem. Draven forced himself to remain outwardly calm, though every instinct within him demanded he remove Roderick from his presence immediately and permanently. "I am afraid I cannot assist you with whatever domestic matter you are referring to, Lord Vane. Elena is under my protection now, and will remain so for as long as she chooses." Something dangerous flashed behind Roderick's eyes at those words, quickly hidden beneath his practiced composure. "Of course, Your Majesty. I would not dream of questioning your claims further, especially not before the entire court." He offered another shallow bow before retreating back into the crowd, though Draven noticed the way his gaze lingered on Elena until the very last moment, calculating, patient, clearly unwilling to accept defeat so easily. Once Roderick had disappeared from sight, Elena let out a shaking breath, her composure finally cracking, as the full weight of the encounter settled upon her. "He knows," she whispered, panic evident in every word. "He knows I am here." Draven turned to face her fully, gently taking both her hands in his own, forcing her attention away from the retreating crowd and back onto him. "He suspects," Draven corrected firmly, "but he cannot act against you within these walls, not without direct evidence, and not without risking direct conflict with the crown itself. You are safe here, Elena, I promise you that." Elena searched his expression for any hint of uncertainty, finding instead only steady, unwavering resolve. Slowly her breathing began to calm, though the fear in her eyes remained, a lingering shadow that Draven found himself desperate to erase entirely. Whatever tonight had started between them, Draven understood now with absolute clarity that it had already become far more than a temporary solution to a political crisis. His wolf had recognized something in Elena from the very first moment, and now, having witnessed the fear Roderick's presence provoked within her, that recognition had transformed into something fierce and protective, an instinct he no longer wished to fight against. The night was far from over, and the danger surrounding Elena had only just begun to reveal itself. The music continued, but Elena could no longer hear it clearly over the pounding of her own heartbeat. Roderick had found her. After 3 days of running, of hiding, of convincing herself that distance alone might keep her safe, he had simply walked into the palace and found her standing beside the king himself. She felt the walls of the grand hall pressing closer around her, the golden light and laughter suddenly suffocating rather than celebratory. "Come," Draven said quietly, noticing the panic still evident in her expression. "Let us step away from the crowd for a moment." He guided her toward a quieter alcove near the edge of the hall, partially hidden behind tall marble columns draped with silk banners. Away from the immediate press of nobles, Elena finally allowed herself to breathe more freely, though the fear coiled tightly in her chest refused to fully release its grip. "You said I would be safe here," she said, her voice trembling despite her efforts to remain composed. "But he was standing right in front of me. He knows exactly where I am now." "And he cannot touch you," Draven replied firmly, his eyes holding hers with steady conviction. "Not within these walls, not while you stand under my protection. Whatever authority Roderick holds in the Southern Territory means nothing here. You do not understand him, Elena said, shaking her head. Roderick does not need to act directly. He is patient, he will wait, and he will find some way to reclaim what he considers his property, regardless of whatever laws stand in his way. Draven's jaw tightened at her choice of words, his expression darkening with something Elena could only describe as protective fury. You are not property, Elena. Not his, not mine, not anyone's. Whatever he made you believe about yourself during your time with him, it was a lie. Elena stared up at him, startled by the intensity in his voice. She was not accustomed to anyone speaking on her behalf with such conviction, let alone a king she had known for less than a single evening. Something in her chest loosened slightly at his words, a small crack forming in the wall of fear she had built around herself these past months. Why do you care so much? She asked quietly, genuine confusion coloring her voice. You owe me nothing. I forced myself into your evening through a desperate lie, yet you continue to defend me as though I matter to you. Draven was quiet for a long moment, his gaze searching her face as though wrestling with something he was not entirely certain how to explain. I have asked myself the same question since the moment you first spoke my name to that guard, he admitted finally. I do not have a complete answer for you yet, but something about your presence tonight feels significant in ways I am only beginning to understand. Before Elena could respond, a server approached with a tray of refreshments, offering a brief interruption that allowed both of them a moment to collect themselves. Draven took 2 glasses from the tray, offering one to Elena, who accepted gratefully, her throat suddenly dry from the tension of the evening. Tell me about your home, Draven said once the server had moved on, his tone gentler now, an obvious attempt to ease the tension still lingering between them. Before Roderick, before all of this. Elena hesitated, unaccustomed to anyone showing genuine interest in her life before her forced mating. Slowly, though, she found herself speaking, describing the small hillside village where she had grown up, the quiet routines of her days spent sewing alongside her mother, the simple comfort of a life that, while modest, had never once made her feel like something to be owned or controlled. Draven listened intently, occasionally asking gentle questions that revealed a genuine curiosity about her life, rather than the polite, distracted interest she might have expected from someone in his position. As she spoke, Elena felt herself relaxing slightly, the tight knot of fear in her chest loosening bit by bit with each passing moment. You speak of your village with such warmth, Draven observed after she finished describing the small festival her community held each autumn. Do you wish to return there, once you are free of Roderick's pursuit? Elena's expression clouded slightly. I am not certain returning home is possible any longer. My father arranged the mating with Roderick to secure favor with his family. Returning would mean facing consequences I am not prepared to endure, and possibly endangering my family further. Then you will need somewhere else to go, Draven said thoughtfully. Somewhere Roderick cannot easily reach, and where your family's involvement in the arrangement cannot be used against you. I have not had the luxury of planning that far ahead, Elena admitted. I was simply focused on surviving each day since I ran. Draven studied her for a long moment, something contemplative crossing his expression. Perhaps that changes tonight, he said finally. You mentioned earlier that our arrangement ends at dawn, that you intend to leave and never return. But I find myself reluctant to simply release you into uncertainty, especially with Roderick now aware of your location. Elena's breath caught slightly at the implication behind his words. What are you suggesting? I am suggesting that perhaps our arrangement does not need to end so abruptly, Draven said carefully, watching her reaction closely. You could remain here, under the protection of the crown, for as long as you need to establish a safer path forward. No obligations beyond what you choose to accept. Elena stared at him, torn between the instinctive pull toward accepting safety after so many days of exhausting fear, and the deep-seated caution that years of mistreatment had instilled within her. Trusting anyone, especially another alpha, however kind he had shown himself to be tonight, felt like an enormous risk she was not certain she was prepared to take. I do not know if I can accept that, she said honestly, not because I doubt your intentions, but because trusting so quickly has never served me well. I understand, Draven said, and something in his tone suggested he genuinely did, rather than simply offering polite reassurance. The offer remains regardless, without any expectation attached to it. Whatever you decide, your safety tonight is not in question. Elena felt an unfamiliar warmth spreading through her chest at his words, a sensation she was still struggling to name. Whatever this strange connection was that had formed between them over the course of a single evening, she could not deny that something about Draven's presence made her feel safer than she had felt in longer than she could remember. As the evening continued, the music swelling once more into a lively, celebratory rhythm, Elena found herself gradually easing into the role she had accidentally claimed for herself. She danced again with Draven, exchanged brief, polite conversations with curious nobles who approached to offer their congratulations, and slowly began to understand the strange, unexpected comfort that had settled between herself and the king throughout the night. But even as the tension of the evening began to ease, she remained acutely aware of Roderick's presence somewhere within the crowded hall, watching, waiting, patient in a way that unsettled her far more than any direct confrontation could have. Whatever safety tonight offered her, she understood with growing certainty that it would not last indefinitely. Dawn was approaching, and with it, the moment she would need to decide whether to walk away from the strange, unexpected sanctuary she had found within Draven's protection, or to take the enormous risk of trusting him further, despite every instinct urging her toward caution. Neither of them yet realized how quickly that decision would be forced upon them, nor how dramatically the events of the coming hours would change everything they believed about the arrangement they had built together over the course of a single, unforgettable night. Edmund Hale had served 3 generations of the Ashran family, and in all his years within the palace, he had never once seen the king behave the way he had tonight. Standing near the refreshment tables, Edmund watched Draven and Elena from a discreet distance, his sharp eyes noting every small detail of their interaction. The way the king leaned slightly toward her when she spoke, as though unwilling to miss a single word. The way his hand found hers repeatedly throughout the evening, seemingly without conscious thought. The careful, protective attention he paid to her comfort, adjusting his pace when she seemed tired, positioning himself subtly between her and anyone who approached with too much curiosity. This was not the behavior of a king simply satisfying a political requirement. This was something else entirely. Something Edmund recognized from old stories his grandmother used to tell him about fated bonds, though he had never expected to witness such a thing firsthand, and certainly not under such unusual circumstances. His suspicions about Elena's true identity had grown steadily throughout the evening. When he had first assisted with preparations for the reception line earlier that night, before Elena's dramatic arrival, he had personally reviewed the guest registry. No name matching hers appeared anywhere on the list. More troubling still, one of the younger palace maids had approached him quietly during the ceremony, whispering that she recognized the gown Elena wore as one from the emergency wardrobe kept for guests who arrived without proper attire. Torn and stained garments discovered discarded behind the linen crates in the servants' corridor. Elena was not who she claimed to be. She had no registered invitation, no established identity within any noble house, and clearly no experience with the practiced etiquette of court life. Whatever story had brought her into the palace tonight, it was not one that aligned with the polished narrative Draven had presented to the assembled nobles. Edmund understood, with the sharp instincts that had made him invaluable as an advisor, that he held enough information tonight to potentially unravel everything his king had built through his hasty declaration. A single word to the right person, a single question raised publicly, and the entire arrangement could collapse, handing Lord Castellan and his allies the exact opening they needed to challenge the throne. He should have reported his suspicions immediately. That was, without question, his duty as the king's most trusted advisor. And yet, watching Draven now, laughing softly at something Elena had said, his entire posture relaxed in a way Edmund had not witnessed since long before his father's passing, Edmund found himself hesitating. He remembered the young prince Draven had once been, before the weight of leadership settled permanently onto his shoulders, before the constant pressure of maintaining strength and control had worn away much of the easy warmth that once defined him. Edmund had watched that warmth fade gradually over the years, replaced by careful, guarded composure necessary for survival among the treacherous politics of court life. Tonight, for the first time in longer than Edmund could remember, he saw glimpses of that warmth returning, however briefly, however uncertain its cause. He made his decision quietly, without fanfare, choosing to remain silent about the discoveries he had made. Whatever secrets Elena carried, whatever complications her sudden arrival might create moving forward, Edmund found himself unwilling to be the reason that fragile, unexpected happiness disappeared from his king's expression so quickly after finally appearing. He would watch carefully. He would remain alert to any genuine danger the situation might pose. But for tonight at least, he would allow this strange, unlikely arrangement to continue undisturbed. His attention shifted as he noticed Roderick Vane moving purposefully through the crowd, positioning himself near the edge of the dance floor with clear intention rather than casual curiosity. Edmund's instincts, honed through years of navigating court intrigue, immediately recognized the calculated patience in the Southern Lord's posture, the careful way he watched Elena while maintaining polite distance. Edmund had heard whispers about Lord Vane's reputation, stories of cruelty carefully hidden behind wealth and political influence, of an Omega partner who had disappeared from his household under mysterious circumstances several days earlier. The pieces were beginning to align in Edmund's mind with uncomfortable clarity. If Elena truly was the missing partner Roderick sought, then tonight's events were far more complicated and dangerous than a simple political inconvenience. This was not merely a matter of the king presenting an unregistered guest as his partner. This involved an Alpha Lord's claim over an Omega who had fled him, a situation that carried serious legal and political implications, regardless of how genuinely Draven's feelings toward her might be developing. Edmund approached Draven quietly during a brief lull in the evening's festivities, drawing him aside under the pretense of discussing logistical matters related to the ceremony's conclusion. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, keeping his voice low enough that only Draven could hear him clearly. "I feel it necessary to share certain observations I have made this evening, though I wish to preface this by saying I have no intention of exposing anything without your explicit direction." Draven's expression shifted immediately, alert and cautious. "Speak plainly, Edmund." "Elena's name appears nowhere on tonight's guest registry," Edmund said quietly. Additionally, a member of the household staff recognized her gown as one taken from the emergency wardrobe reserved for unexpected guests. "I believe there is a strong possibility that she is, in fact, the missing partner Lord Vane has been openly searching for these past several days." Draven's jaw tightened, though he did not appear entirely surprised by this information. "I am aware of her circumstances, Edmund. She fled a mating arrangement that placed her in considerable danger. I do not intend to hand her back to the man responsible for that danger, regardless of whatever legal claims he believes he holds over her." "I understand, Your Majesty," Edmund replied carefully. "I simply wish to ensure you are fully informed, given the potential complications this situation could create, both politically and legally, should Lord Vane choose to press his claim formally before the court." "Thank you for your discretion, Edmund," Draven said, something like genuine gratitude softening his expression briefly. "I will handle whatever challenges arise from this. For now, I ask only that you continue to maintain your silence regarding what you have observed tonight." "Of course, Your Majesty," Edmund said, bowing slightly before retreating to allow Draven to return to Elena's side. As Edmund watched them reunite near the edge of the dance floor, Elena's expression brightening slightly at Draven's return, he found himself hoping, against every instinct of caution his position demanded, that whatever connection had formed between them tonight might prove strong enough to withstand whatever challenges Roderick Vane intended to bring against them. Across the hall, Roderick continued watching with calculated patience, clearly waiting for the right moment to press his claim more forcefully. Edmund understood, with growing certainty, that the true conflict of this evening had only just begun, and that whatever peace Draven and Elena had found together over these past few hours would soon be tested far more severely than either of them yet realized. The night was far from over, and Edmund, despite his careful neutrality, found himself quietly hoping that his king's unlikely partner would prove strong enough to weather whatever storm approached them both. Roderick Vane had waited long enough. He had spent the better part of the evening watching Elena from a careful distance, studying the way the king treated her with unmistakable attentiveness, gauging the political risk of pressing his claim too aggressively before the assembled court. But patience, he decided, had served its purpose already. It was time to reclaim what belonged to him. He approached them directly as the musicians paused between songs, cutting through the crowd with the same calculated confidence that had built his reputation throughout the Southern Territory. Elena noticed him first, her entire body tensing beside Draven as Roderick closed the remaining distance between them. "Your Majesty," Roderick said smoothly, offering a shallow bow that carried little genuine respect. "I find myself unable to continue enjoying this celebration without addressing a matter of considerable importance to me." Draven's posture shifted immediately, protective and alert, positioning himself slightly in front of Elena without appearing overtly hostile. "I believe we already addressed this matter earlier this evening, Lord Vane." "Did we?" Roderick asked, his tone deceptively pleasant. "I recall you dismissing my observation rather quickly. However, I have since confirmed through my own investigation that the woman standing beside you tonight is indeed my missing partner. She fled our home several days ago under circumstances I am prepared to discuss privately, should you prefer to avoid public embarrassment." Several nearby nobles had already begun turning their attention toward the unfolding confrontation, drawn by the obvious tension crackling between the two powerful men. Draven's expression remained carefully controlled, though Elena could feel the barely restrained tension radiating from him, a coiled readiness that reminded her, uncomfortably, of a predator preparing to defend its territory. "Elena stands here tonight as my chosen partner, formally presented before this entire court," Draven said, his voice carrying enough authority to draw the attention of everyone within earshot. Whatever arrangement existed between the two of you previously holds no bearing on her current circumstances. On the contrary, Roderick replied, his composed mask slipping slightly to reveal something colder underneath. Pack law clearly recognizes prior mating claims as taking precedence over subsequent arrangements, particularly when the individual in question left without completing the formal separation process required by law. Elena remains legally bound to me until such separation is properly executed. Elena felt her stomach twist painfully at his words. She had fled before understanding the full legal implications of her departure, desperate only to escape the mounting cruelty of her circumstances. The idea that some technical legal requirement might now be used to drag her back into that same danger sent fresh panic coursing through her. Then perhaps we should discuss the circumstances that led to her departure, Draven said, his voice growing colder, more dangerous, as his patience visibly thinned. I understand there were considerable concerns regarding the treatment she received within your household. Roderick's expression tightened almost imperceptibly, though he recovered quickly. Whatever concerns you believe exist, Your Majesty, they do not override established pack law. I am prepared to pursue formal legal recourse if necessary to reclaim what remains rightfully mine. The word rightfully struck something deep within Draven, and Elena felt the shift in him immediately, a sudden surge of fierce, protective anger that seemed to ripple through the air around them. His wolf, she realized with startling clarity, was reacting to Roderick's continued insistence on ownership with something approaching genuine fury. She is not property to be claimed, reclaimed, or fought over as though she holds no voice in her own future, Draven said, his voice low and dangerous, carrying easily across the now completely silent hall. Whatever legal technicalities you believe support your position, I will not allow you to force her back into circumstances she risked everything to escape. With respect, Your Majesty, Roderick said, his composure finally cracking to reveal genuine anger beneath. This is not simply a matter of personal preference. Pack law exists to maintain stability and order. If every Omega who grew dissatisfied with their arrangement could simply flee to whatever Alpha offered temporary shelter, the entire structure of our society would collapse into chaos. Then perhaps, Draven replied, his voice carrying absolute finality now. The structure of our society requires examination, rather than blind adherence to laws that allow cruelty to persist unchecked simply because reclaiming ownership proves legally convenient. A murmur spread through the gathered nobles at this bold statement, some clearly scandalized by the king's willingness to challenge established tradition so openly, others watching with cautious interest, perhaps recognizing truth in his words that they had never previously considered voicing themselves. Roderick's expression darkened further, clearly recognizing that his careful political calculations had failed to account for the depth of the king's determination. You would risk the stability of your own reign, Your Majesty, over a woman you have known for a single evening? I would risk considerably more than that, Draven said, and something in his tone made Elena's breath catch, a certainty and conviction that left no room for doubt regarding his sincerity. Elena remains under my protection, formally and permanently. If you wish to pursue legal action, you may do so through proper channels, though I promise you will find little sympathy for your position once the full circumstances of her departure become public knowledge. The threat was clear, unmistakable, and Roderick understood immediately the danger of pushing further in such a public setting, where witnesses now stood ready to recall every word of this exchange. His jaw tightened with barely contained frustration, though he forced his expression back into careful composure. Very well, Your Majesty, he said finally, his voice tight with suppressed anger. I will consider my next steps carefully. However, I would advise you to remember that legal claims do not simply disappear because you wish them to. With that, he offered a final, shallow bow before retreating through the crowd, disappearing toward the palace exit, with barely restrained fury evident in every stiff movement of his departure. Once he had gone, the tension within the hall slowly began to ease, nobles resuming their quiet conversations, though Elena could feel the weight of their curious glances lingering upon her far longer than she felt comfortable with. She turned to face Draven, her hands trembling slightly as the adrenaline of the confrontation began to fade, leaving raw emotion in its wake. You should not have said those things, she whispered. You have made a powerful enemy tonight, and all because of me. Draven turned to face her fully, gently taking her trembling hands in his own, his expression softening from the fierce protectiveness of moments earlier into something gentler, more sincere. I meant every word, Elena. You are not property. You never were, regardless of what anyone else believes or claims. Tonight, standing before this entire court, I claimed you not out of political convenience, but because something within me refuses to imagine allowing you to return to a life that caused you such fear and suffering." Elena stared up at him, overwhelmed by the sincerity evident in his expression, uncertain how to process the enormity of what had just transpired. Whatever fragile arrangement they had built together throughout this single extraordinary evening had just been tested publicly, and Draven had chosen, without hesitation, to defend her completely. But even as gratitude and something warmer, something she was not yet ready to name, filled her chest, Elena could not fully silence the fear still lingering within her. Roderick would not simply accept defeat so easily. Whatever legal or political maneuvering he intended to pursue next, she understood with growing certainty that tonight's confrontation marked only the beginning of a much larger battle yet to come. The hours following Roderick's departure passed in a strange, uneasy blur for Elena. She remained beside Draven as the celebration continued around them, exchanging polite conversation with curious nobles, accepting congratulations that felt hollow given the deception underlying their entire arrangement. Yet beneath the surface of practiced smiles and careful composure, Elena's mind raced with the implications of everything Draven had declared so publicly on her behalf. He had claimed her, formally and completely, before the entire court, not as a temporary political solution, but as something permanent, something real. The weight of that declaration settled uncomfortably within her chest, stirring emotions she had not allowed herself to feel in longer than she could remember. Fear, certainly. But underneath that fear, something else entirely. Something that felt dangerously close to hope. She had learned, through painful experience, that hope often preceded disappointment, that trusting in Alpha's promises typically led to consequences far worse than the initial vulnerability of believing them. Roderick had once offered similar assurances during their brief courtship before their mating ceremony, promises of respect and partnership that had crumbled almost immediately once their bond became legally binding. What guarantee did she have that Draven's protection tonight would not eventually reveal itself as another form of control, however gently disguised? The thought unsettled her deeply as the evening's festivities finally began winding down, guests slowly departing as dawn approached on the horizon. Draven guided her away from the main hall eventually, toward a quieter private chamber where they could speak without the constant scrutiny of curious onlookers. Once the door closed behind them, sealing them away from the remaining noise of the celebration, Elena finally allowed the tension she had been suppressing all evening to surface fully. "You cannot simply claim ownership of my future without my full understanding of what that means," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of exhaustion and barely contained anxiety. "Tonight, you declared before the entire court that I belong to you now, permanently. I never agreed to that." Draven's expression shifted immediately, concern replacing the exhaustion that had begun settling into his own features. "That was never my intention, Elena. I spoke those words to protect you from Roderick's claims, not to establish ownership over you." "But that is exactly what it sounded like," Elena pressed, her voice rising slightly as fear and frustration finally broke through her careful composure. "I fled one Alpha who believed he owned me completely, only to find myself now publicly bound to another, regardless of how kindly you have treated me tonight. How am I meant to trust that this arrangement will not eventually reveal the same cruelty Roderick hid so carefully at first?" Draven was silent for a long moment, clearly absorbing the weight of her words, the genuine fear underlying her accusation. When he finally spoke, his voice carried none of the authority he had displayed earlier before the court, replaced instead by something quieter, more vulnerable. "You are right to question my intentions," he admitted. "I cannot ask you to simply trust me based on a single evening together, regardless of whatever connection I feel developing between us. Trust must be earned through consistent action, not through grand declarations made in the heat of confrontation." Elena studied him carefully, searching for any hint of manipulation behind his words, finding instead only genuine, unguarded honesty. "Then explain to me clearly what you actually intended tonight, without the political theater required before the court." Draven took a slow breath before responding, clearly choosing his words with careful deliberation. "From the moment you first spoke my name to that guard, something within me reacted in a way I had never experienced before. My wolf recognized something in you immediately, an instinct so overwhelming that I found myself unable to ignore it despite having no rational explanation for its intensity." "What are you saying?" Elena asked, though some part of her already suspected the answer, given the strange warmth she herself had felt from their very first touch. "I believe," Draven said quietly, "that you may be my true fated mate, not a temporary solution to secure my throne, not a political convenience, but someone my very nature recognized as significant the moment we first touched." Elena felt her breath catch at the weight of his admission, She had heard old stories about fated bonds throughout her childhood, tales of instant, undeniable recognition between true mates, though she had always dismissed them as romanticized fiction rather than genuine possibility. Even if that is true, she said slowly, working through the implications carefully, it does not change the fact that I have spent months learning what it feels like to have my choices stripped away by an alpha who believed our bond gave him unlimited authority over my life. I cannot simply accept a similar arrangement again, regardless of whether it stems from genuine fate or calculated convenience. I am not asking you to accept anything, Draven said firmly, taking a step closer, though he maintained enough distance to respect the boundary evident in her tense posture. Whatever my wolf believes, whatever ancient instinct drew me toward you tonight, I refuse to force that connection upon you against your will. You deserve the freedom to choose your own path forward, entirely independent of whatever fate may have intended. Then what happens now? Elena asked, exhaustion finally breaking through the tension in her voice. Roderick still believes he holds legal claim over me. You have publicly declared me as your partner before the entire court. And somewhere beneath all of this political complexity, there may be a genuine bond neither of us fully understands yet. How am I meant to navigate all of this without simply losing myself entirely in the process? Draven's expression softened with genuine empathy at her words. You navigate it one choice at a time, he said gently. Beginning with this moment, right now, you may choose to leave this palace tonight, and I will ensure you have every resource necessary to disappear safely, beyond Roderick's reach, no obligation attached. Or you may choose to remain, not because fate or law demands it, but because you decide, freely and independently, that doing so serves your own best interests. Elena stared at him, searching his expression for any hint of manipulation hidden beneath his carefully offered choice. She found none. Only patient, genuine sincerity, waiting for her decision without any visible expectation weighing upon it. I need time to think, she said finally, her voice quiet but steady. This entire evening has been overwhelming beyond anything I could have anticipated when I first stumbled into your ball tonight. Take whatever time you need, Draven said gently. I will ensure you have a private chamber where you can rest undisturbed, away from the remaining celebration and any lingering political complications. Whatever you decide, Elena, I will honor your choice completely. As Draven arranged for a servant to guide her toward private quarters within the palace, Elena felt the exhaustion of the past several days finally catching up with her fully, the adrenaline that had sustained her through her desperate flight, and the evening's dramatic confrontations beginning to fade into overwhelming weariness. Whatever decision awaited her once she had rested, she understood with growing clarity that tonight had changed something fundamental within her, planting a seed of hope she had never expected to feel again after everything Roderick had put her through. Whether that hope would eventually bloom into trust or wither beneath the weight of continued uncertainty remained to be seen. For now, she allowed herself simply to rest, trusting, if only for a few precious hours, that the safety Draven had promised her would hold true until morning arrived. Elena woke to soft morning light filtering through unfamiliar curtains, momentarily disoriented before the events of the previous night came rushing back to her. She sat up slowly in the comfortable bed she had been given, taking a moment to simply breathe, to process everything that had happened since she first stumbled desperately into the palace garden. The exhaustion that had overwhelmed her hours earlier had eased somewhat after several hours of genuine rest, though the weight of the decision awaiting her remained heavy upon her mind. A gentle knock sounded at her door, followed by the soft voice of a young servant announcing breakfast had been prepared, should she wish to eat. Elena accepted gratefully, realizing she had not eaten a proper meal in days, her body finally reminding her of its neglected needs now that immediate danger no longer consumed her every thought. As she ate the simple, warm breakfast brought to her chamber, Elena found her mind returning repeatedly to Draven's words from the previous night. The idea that she might be his fated mate still felt overwhelming, almost impossible to fully accept given everything she had endured with Roderick. Yet she could not deny the strange warmth she had felt from their very first touch, nor the genuine sincerity evident in every interaction they had shared throughout the evening. More than his words, though, it was his actions that lingered most persistently in her thoughts. The way he had defended her before the entire court, risking his own political stability without hesitation, the gentle patience he had shown when she needed space to process her fear, the clear, unwavering respect for her autonomy, even while declaring feelings that could easily have justified demanding her compliance instead. Roderick had never once offered her genuine choice. Every decision throughout their brief courtship and subsequent mating had been made for her, presented as though her agreement were simply a formality, rather than a genuine consideration. Draven, by contrast, had repeatedly emphasized her right to choose her own path, even when doing so complicated his own position considerably. A knock sounded again at her door, this time revealing Edmund Hale rather than the young servant from earlier. He bowed respectfully before speaking. "Lady Elena," he said, using the honorific with careful deliberation, "His Majesty has asked me to inform you that he awaits your decision whenever you feel prepared to share it, with no pressure toward any particular outcome. He also asked me to mention that Lord Vane departed the palace grounds shortly after dawn, though whether he intends to pursue legal action remains uncertain." Elena studied Edmund carefully, sensing genuine warmth beneath his formal composure. "You have served the king for many years, I assume." "Since before his ascension to the throne, yes," Edmund confirmed. "I have known him since he was a young prince, long before the weight of leadership settled fully upon him." "What was he like then?" Elena asked, curiosity overcoming her earlier hesitation. "Before all of this responsibility." A faint smile crossed Edmund's expression, softening his formal demeanor considerably. "Lighter," he said simply, more willing to laugh freely, less guarded in his interactions with others. "The burdens of leadership have required him to develop considerable restraint over the years, a necessary armor against the constant political maneuvering surrounding the throne." "And last night?" Elena asked quietly, watching him with me. Edmund's smile deepened slightly. "Last night, Lady Elena, I witnessed glimpses of that same lightness returning, however briefly. Whatever exists between the two of you, I have not seen him behave with such genuine warmth in longer than I care to admit." His words settled deeply within Elena, adding weight to the decision she knew she needed to make. After Edmund departed, promising to relay whenever she felt ready to speak with the king, Elena spent several more minutes simply sitting with her thoughts, weighing every consideration carefully. She thought of her small hillside village, of the quiet, comfortable life she had once known before circumstances forced her into a mating she never wanted. She thought of the fear that had consumed every waking moment since her escape, the constant vigilance required to avoid capture. She thought of Roderick's cold, calculating eyes, the way he had spoken of her as though she were simply property to be reclaimed rather than a person with her own thoughts and desires. And she thought of Draven, standing firm before the entire court, declaring with absolute conviction that she was not property, that her choices mattered, that whatever bond existed between them would only continue if she genuinely wished it to. Elena rose from her seat, smoothing the borrowed dress she had been given to sleep in, and made her way toward the door. Whatever fear still lingered within her, she understood clearly now that remaining paralyzed by uncertainty served her no better than blind trust would have. She found Draven in a private study near the main hall, poring over documents with tired eyes that suggested he had gotten little sleep himself. He looked up immediately as she entered, rising from his seat with an expression caught between hope and careful restraint. "Elena," he said quietly, "I hope you were able to rest." "Somewhat," she admitted, closing the door behind her to ensure their privacy. "Enough to think clearly at least." Draven remained standing, giving her space to speak without pressure, though she could see the tension evident in his posture as he waited for whatever decision she had reached. "I do not know if what you feel toward me constitutes a true fated bond," Elena began carefully. "I have no experience with such things beyond old stories from my childhood, but I do know that everything you showed me last night, your patience, your willingness to defend me without demanding anything in return, your genuine respect for my right to choose, differs entirely from everything I experienced with Roderick." Draven remained silent, allowing her to continue without interruption. "I am still afraid," Elena admitted honestly. "Trusting again, especially trusting an alpha with the kind of power and authority you hold, feels enormously risky given everything I have endured. But I find myself more afraid of walking away from something that might genuinely be good, simply because fear has become such a constant companion these past months." "What are you saying, Elena?" Draven asked quietly, hope evident beneath his careful composure. "I am saying," Elena replied, taking a slow breath, "that I would like to remain here, not because law or fate demands it, but because I choose to. Freely and completely. For as long as this arrangement continues to honor the respect and genuine care you have shown me, since the moment we first met." Draven's expression transformed immediately, relief and joy breaking through his careful restraint as he crossed the distance between them, stopping just close enough to take her hands gently in his own. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice carrying genuine gratitude. "For choosing this, for choosing me, despite everything you have endured that would justify choosing otherwise. This does not mean I am fully healed from what Roderick put me through," Elena said honestly, wanting to ensure he understood the complexity of her decision fully. "It will take time before I trust completely, before the fear fully fades." I understand completely, Draven assured her. I am prepared to earn that trust patiently, for as long as it takes, without ever demanding more than you are genuinely ready to give. As they stood together in the quiet study, morning light streaming through tall windows, Elena felt something settle within her chest, a fragile but genuine sense of hope she had not believed herself capable of feeling again after everything she had survived. Whatever challenges still awaited them, from Roderick's lingering threat to the complicated politics of the court, she understood clearly now that she had made the right choice in trusting this unexpected connection that fate, or perhaps simply chance, had brought into her life. 3 months passed before the formal ceremony finally took place, 3 months during which Elena slowly rebuilt her understanding of what genuine partnership could look like, free from fear and control. The time had not been without its challenges. Roderick had indeed pursued legal action initially, filing formal claims before the regional council that oversaw pack law disputes. Draven had responded not with political maneuvering alone, but by ensuring the full truth of Roderick's cruelty during their brief mating became known through proper legal channels, presenting evidence that ultimately led the council to rule decisively in Elena's favor. Roderick's claim was dismissed entirely, his reputation among the noble houses considerably damaged by the revelations that emerged during the proceedings. Throughout this process, Elena had watched Draven navigate the complicated politics with the same careful respect for her autonomy he had shown from their very first evening together. He consulted her on every decision affecting her case, ensured she never felt pressured to share more than she was comfortable revealing, and consistently prioritized her well-being over the political convenience of resolving the matter quickly. Slowly, gradually, trust had grown between them, built not through grand declarations, but through countless small moments of genuine care and consistent respect. Draven made time each day to simply talk with her, learning about her interests, her hopes, the small details of her personality that Roderick had never once bothered to discover during their brief, miserable time together. He encouraged her to develop her own interests within the palace, supporting her growing passion for herbalism and healing that had always existed within her but had been discouraged during her previous mating. Edmund had become an unexpected ally throughout this period as well, offering guidance on court politics and gradually becoming something of a trusted friend to Elena as she navigated the unfamiliar complexities of palace life. Through him she met Clara, a warm, cheerful woman who served as head of the palace kitchens and quickly became one of Elena's closest confidants, offering friendship entirely separate from the political complexities surrounding her relationship with Draven. As the months passed, Elena found herself gradually shedding the constant vigilance that had defined her existence during her time with Roderick, replacing it with a growing sense of security she had never expected to feel again. Draven's wolf, she had come to understand through his patient explanations, had indeed recognized her as his true fated mate from their very first touch, an ancient instinct that transcended simple attraction or convenience. Yet despite this recognition, Draven had never once pressured her to formalize their bond before she felt genuinely ready. He had waited patiently through her healing process, through moments when old fears resurfaced unexpectedly, through the gradual rebuilding of her confidence and sense of self. His consistent patience, more than anything else, had ultimately convinced Elena that the connection between them was built on something far more solid than instinct alone. Now, standing in a private chamber within the palace, dressed in a gown of deep gold that had been made specifically for her, rather than borrowed or stolen from someone else's wardrobe, Elena studied her reflection with a sense of quiet wonder. The woman staring back at her bore little resemblance to the desperate, frightened fugitive who had stumbled into the palace garden 3 months earlier. Clara adjusted the final details of Elena's hair, humming softly to herself as she worked. "You look radiant," she said warmly. "His Majesty will not be able to take his eyes off you." Elena smiled, though nervous anticipation still fluttered within her chest. "I never imagined my life would lead to this moment," she admitted, "not after everything that came before." "Sometimes the most difficult paths lead to the most unexpected happiness," Clara replied gently. "You deserve every bit of joy waiting for you today, Elena." A soft knock interrupted their conversation, followed by Edmund's familiar voice announcing that the ceremony was ready to begin. Elena took a final steadying breath, meeting her own reflection with quiet determination, before making her way toward the grand hall where, 3 months earlier, she had first claimed to be Draven's partner through a desperate, impulsive lie. Today, that lie would become truth, chosen freely and completely by both of them. The hall had been transformed since that first chaotic evening, decorated now with soft golden banners and delicate white flowers that filled the air with gentle fragrance. The assembled court watched with genuine warmth as Elena walked toward the platform where Draven waited. his expression radiant with an open joy that Edmund had once described as rare during his years serving the crown. As Elena reached the platform, Draven took her hands gently in his own, his eyes holding hers with unwavering devotion. 3 months ago, he said, his voice carrying easily across the silent hall, a woman I had never met claimed to be my partner to escape a danger she should never have faced. My wolf recognized her immediately as something far more significant than a convenient solution to a political crisis. Today, I stand before you not to satisfy ancient law, but to formally claim the woman who has become my true partner in every sense, chosen freely, by her own will and mine. Elena felt tears gathering in her eyes as she listened to his words, overwhelmed by how far they had traveled together since that first desperate, uncertain night. 3 months ago, she replied, her voice steady despite the emotion coursing through her. I was running from a life that offered me no genuine choice, no respect for who I truly was. Today, I choose this bond freely, having found in Draven not merely fate's chosen partner, but someone who has consistently honored my autonomy, my healing, and my genuine happiness above all else. The traditional vows followed, spoken with far greater confidence and certainty than the hasty, desperate words exchanged on that first chaotic evening. As Draven placed the ceremonial pendant around Elena's neck, marking her formally as queen and true partner to the Alpha King, the assembled court erupted into genuine celebration, far removed from the tense, calculating atmosphere that had surrounded their first public appearance together. Later that evening, as the celebration continued around them, Draven guided Elena toward the same balcony where they had first spoken honestly about her fears and his growing recognition of their bond. The night air carried the same gentle scent of jasmine from the gardens below, though the tension that had once defined their conversations there had long since faded into comfortable, genuine affection. Do you remember what I told you that first night? Draven asked softly, his arm settling naturally around her shoulders as they looked out over the moonlit gardens together. That I could not explain why your presence felt so significant, only that something within me recognized it as true. I remember, Elena said, leaning into his warmth with complete trust, something she had never imagined possible during those first desperate hours of their acquaintance. I did not understand it then. I am not certain I fully understand it even now, but I know, without any doubt, that choosing to stay that first morning was the best decision I have ever made. Draven turned to face her fully, his expression soft with genuine love rather than the careful restraint he had once maintained. Your wolf, or rather your own instincts, brought you to me that night, seeking safety amid genuine danger. But everything that followed, every choice to trust, to heal, to build something real between us, that was entirely your own doing, chosen freely despite every reason you had to remain guarded. And you, Elena reminded him gently, chose patience over convenience, respect over control, every single day since then. They stood together quietly for a long moment, watching the stars scattered across the clear night sky, both fully aware of how remarkably their lives had changed since that first chaotic, desperate evening 3 months earlier. Whatever fate or ancient instinct had first drawn them together, Elena understood now with complete certainty that the genuine partnership they had built together, through patience, respect, and consistent care, mattered far more than any prophecy or bond determined by forces beyond their control. As the celebration continued within the grand hall behind them, Elena finally allowed herself to fully embrace the happiness she had once believed impossible to reclaim, standing beside a king who had shown her, through countless small acts of genuine kindness, exactly what true partnership could look like when built on mutual respect rather than ownership or control. Her wolf, quiet and content for the first time in longer than she could remember, settled peacefully within her, finally at rest beside the mate it had recognized from their very first unexpected meeting.